welcome to the deep dive. You sent over some really interesting material from FinCrime Intelligence about risk appetite. And it struck me that the definition, well, it sounds simple enough, right?
It does on the surface.
But it actually seems to dictate, well, almost everything about how a financial institution runs things day to day.
That's absolutely right. I mean, fundamentally, risk appetite is just how much risk an organization is willing and, crucially, able to take on to meet its goals. Think of it like their internal compass guiding them.
Exactly, a compass. And today we're not just going to, read out the definition. We want to really unpack what it means, practically speaking, for financial crime compliance.
Yeah, the nitty-gritty.
We're talking about those real choices companies face, like how much risk is okay when bringing on a new customer, or dealing with different countries, different jurisdictions. It's about where they draw that line in the sand.
Precisely. And while the idea, the concept, seems straightforward, applying it, that's where it gets, well, complex. It's this constant balancing act, isn't it? Chasing business objectives, yes, but also navigating this maze of regulations and, sticking to ethical standards.
And the FinCrime intelligence piece, it calls out some key areas where you really see this tension. Customer onboarding, for one. How much checking is really enough? Then there's geographic exposure, or some places just sort of too risky to touch.
A big question for many firms.
And product complexity, too. Can certain financial products just naturally crank up the risk level? So you think about those three: onboarding, geography, product complexity. Which one do you reckon is maybe the trickiest for a company trying to pin down its risk appetite?
That's a really good question. I think often it's the geographic exposure that poses, well, a particularly knotty challenge, because the rules, the level of financial crime, even political stability, it can just be wildly different from one place to another.
Yeah, I can see that.
So trying to set one clear, consistent appetite that works everywhere, that's incredibly tough.
That makes a lot of sense. You could have totally different legal setups, different enforcement attitudes, just depending on where you are.
Yeah.
So how does a company actually start building this risk appetite? The material mentioned a top-down approach. What does that actually look like?
Right. Top-down basically means leadership sets the tone. The board, senior management, they're the ones defining the big picture, the overall appetite for risk. And FinCrime Intelligence points to several key strategic things they need to weigh up in that process.
Okay, let's dive into those. First one is the regulatory environment. Now, that sounds simple, follow the law, but I suspect there's more to it.
Oh, definitely. It's not just knowing the laws, the directives on the books. It's also about understanding the enforcement climate, how regulators actually act in each place the company operates.
Ah, so the spirit versus the letter sometimes.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. Regulators in country A might be way more aggressive on, say, money laundering than in country B. You have to factor that in. You asked earlier about different appetites. Think about a big multinational. The really strict AML rules in the EU might force them to be much more conservative there compared to maybe somewhere with less developed regulations. Same company, different approach based on location.
That's a perfect example. Okay, what's next on the list? Organizational capacity.
Yeah.
This clicks immediately. You can't aim high on risk if you don't have the team or the tools to manage it.
Exactly. FinCrime Intelligence really stresses the role of internal controls, the actual resources, money, people, tech, and the expertise inside the company. A smaller outfit, maybe with a lean compliance team. Their risk appetite is naturally going to be different from some huge global bank with massive resources and fancy systems.
Right.
Their basic ability to spot and deal with risks is just fundamentally different.
Yeah, it's like saying you want to run a marathon when you've only trained for a 5K. The ambition doesn't match the capability. Okay, the next factor is reputational tolerance. This feels a bit fuzzier maybe, but I bet it's a powerful driver.
Oh, hugely powerful. Some firms, they guard their brand image fiercely. It's paramount. So even if taking on a certain client or operating in a certain region is technically legal, they might just say no if there's a whiff of reputational damage to protect the brand.
Can you think of examples, like industries maybe?
Sure, maybe luxury brands or companies that really trade on being ethical, they might just avoid certain high-risk sectors or countries altogether, even if the financial crime risk itself seems manageable. The potential headline risk is just too high.
That makes total sense. A bad news story can hurt way more than missing out on one deal. And lastly, business objectives. This sounds like where the strategy rubber meets the compliance road, balancing making money with staying clean.
That's the core of it, yes. You need both for a sustainable business. A company's growth plans, who they're trying to sell to, their financial targets, all that heavily influences the risk appetite. A firm aggressively expanding into new, maybe less stable markets, they might have a different appetite than a company focused on slow, steady growth in established areas. It's always a trade-off.
Okay, so leadership chews on all this. Regulatory stuff, capacity, reputation, goals. And then the material says they create a risk appetite statement. What exactly is that? What goes in it?
Think of it as the formal rulebook. It's written down, outlining the company's boundaries for risk. FinCrime Intelligence says it usually lays out high-level thresholds, the overall amount of risk the company's okay with. And importantly, it often lists specific no-go zones.
Like, we absolutely will not do business with X industry or in Y country.
Exactly, explicit exclusions. Plus, it usually gives guidelines on, when you need to escalate tricky situations, how exceptions are handled, and it has to show how this all connects back to the company's main risk management framework. It becomes the go-to guide for everyday decisions.
Such as?
Like deciding whether to take on a new customer or approving a really large or unusual transaction, you check it against the statement.
Got it. So how does this statement, this defined appetite, actually play out in the day-to-day work of financial crime compliance? Thinking AML, CTF, fraud prevention.
Right. This is where it gets really practical. FinCrime Intelligence gives some great examples here. Your risk appetite directly shapes your customer due diligence, how deep you dig when onboarding clients.
Okay.
It sets the dials on your transaction monitoring systems, what size or type of transaction flags up for review. It guides how you assess risk with third parties, your suppliers, your partners. Makes sense. And critically, it influences decisions about dealing with sanctioned individuals or PAP's politically exposed persons.
So if a company sets a very low risk appetite, you'd expect to see much tighter controls, more checks across all those areas.
Precisely. And, as the material rightly points out, if there's a gap between what your statement says your appetite is and what you're actually doing, that's dangerous territory.
How so?
Well, you could face regulatory fines if they think you're not managing the risks you claim to dislike, or huge reputational fallout if a scandal hits an area you were supposedly managing tightly.
Right. The walk needs to match the talk. Now, something that jumped out at me was this idea that risk appetite isn't static. It's not like you said it once and you're done. The material calls it dynamic and evolving. What makes it change?
That's such a crucial point. The world changes, so your risk appetite has to adapt too. FinCrime Intelligence flags a few key drivers. Market conditions shift. Maybe an economic downturn makes you more cautious. New regulations come in or enforcement gets tougher. You absolutely have to react to that. The threats themselves evolve. New scams, new money laundering methods pop up. You need to adjust.
So it's external factors mainly.
Mostly, but internal ones too. Like maybe your own risk management tools and expertise get better over time. That might allow you to comfortably take on a bit more risk or manage existing risks more efficiently.
So it's this constant cycle of assess, adapt, assess, adapt. How often should companies be doing this review?
FinCrime Intelligence really emphasizes regular reviews and updates. And using data is key. Looking at your own risk metrics, analyzing incidents. Say you see a spike in a certain type of fraud. That's a clear signal you might need to lower your appetite in that area, tighten controls.
And communicate the changes, presumably.
Absolutely vital. Clear communication across the whole organization whenever the goalposts shift. Everyone needs to be on the same page with the current guidelines.
What happens if they don't adapt? If they just let the appetite statement gather dust?
Well, FinCrime Intelligence points out two main dangers. Either you become overexposed to financial crime because your appetite is lagging behind the new threats.
Okay, bam.
Or you become too cautious, maybe overly risk-averse based on old information, and you end up missing out on perfectly good, legitimate business opportunities. It's about finding that balance, constantly recalibrating.
Right. Okay, so you've got the appetite defined, written down, you review it regularly. How do you make sure it actually sticks? How do you embed it so it influences what people actually do every day?
The embedding part. That's where it goes from being a document to being part of the culture, the DNA of the place. FinCrime Intelligence gives good examples here for different roles. Frontline staff, the tellers, the relationship managers, they need training to spot red flags that fall outside the company's tolerance.
So they're the first line of defense.
Exactly. Then compliance teams use the appetite as the blueprint for building effective controls for their monitoring and reporting. And senior management, the board, they need regular reports on the risk appetite. Are we sticking to it? Does it need adjusting? It's key for governance.
It really sounds like everyone has a part to play in making it work. That frontline person spotting something iffy needs to know it matters and know what to do about it based on that defined appetite.
Precisely. A clear, well-communicated risk appetite empowers everyone to make better decisions and raise concerns when needed.
So if we were to wrap this up, pulling together the key insights from this FinCrime intelligence material on risk appetite,
Hmm.
what are the main takeaways?
I think the core message is that risk appetite really is the essential guide, that internal compass for how an organization navigates financial crime risk. When it's done well, when it's thoughtfully defined, strategically grounded, and genuinely embedded throughout the business,
Uh-huh.
it leads to stronger compliance, yes, but also smarter, more sustainable growth. And ultimately, it just makes the organization more resilient against these constantly shifting threats.
That's a great summary. It really drives home that this isn't just theory. It has very real impact. Okay, here's a final thought for you, our listener, to maybe mull over. Given everything we've discussed about the changing world of financial crime and regulation, how often do you think companies should really go back to basics and fundamentally reassess their risk appetite? Not just tweak it, but rethink it. And what kind of event, what trigger might warrant that kind of deep fundamental review?
That's a really important question to ponder.
Indeed it is. Thanks again for digging into this complex topic with me. Hopefully for you listening, this gives you a clearer view of how companies manage these critical risks. Understanding that risk appetite really can offer a powerful insight into how a company operates and where its potential weak spots might lie. Until our next deep dive, keep exploring.